So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bob Ench. I'm from Morgan Sindall and I'm a trustee of CFCI. I'm going to take very little part in this event because it's being organised by the Young Ambassadors of CFCI. And I just wanted, before we start, to introduce who they are. So hopefully most of you will know that CFCI has had a partnership with Form the Future for nearly 2 years now. So we agreed to donate a grant annually to Form the Future back in 2019 to help to promote careers in the construction industry. And that relationship has been progressing really nicely. And earlier this year, we decided to try and increase the amount of engagement that we had with students and teachers at local schools by appointing 12 young ambassadors to form sort of like a shadow board of trustees, if you like, to work with the 12 trustees that run CFCI. And so back in March time, we appointed these 12 people that you see on your screen. We actually had quite a bit of competition. There were about 20 applicants, and these 12 were successful. And they now run a monthly meeting, and one of them attends our trustee meetings each month. And we have a trustee who attends one of their meetings each month. And we're hoping that their involvement will achieve a number of things. Firstly, we're hoping that we're going to have a lot more engagement with schools to promote the construction industry to the local students. And I'm delighted to say that we've had about 14 or 15 events that those 12 people have run since the spring. So we are getting more engagement with students for promoting our industry locally, which is fantastic. We're also hoping that the young ambassadors are going to increase the participation of young people in our organisation and in our events, which I guess is a type of diversity in itself. And so far, they've been really good at not only attending events, but in getting some of their colleagues to attend. And now, for the first time, they're also organising events themselves. And this is the very first Young Ambassador event that we will have run. So that is what they're up to. And the first of the events is being organised by 4 of those young ambassadors, 2 of which are going to be on the screen at the moment, and are going to be running this event. One that is going to be chairing it is Stephen Graham from Hawley, and he's going to be ably assisted by Laura Williams from NRAP Architects. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Stephen to run the rest of the event.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, so just before we get into the event, just to give you a quick introduction of what we're going to be running through. So we have 3 panelists today, Tarek from Form the Future, Amos from BPIC, and Dana from Built by Us. So we'll just go through an introduction from each of them and then a presentation, and we'll follow that up with a panel discussion where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions and get involved. And then we'll also run through some initiatives because ultimately we don't just want to run this event as a webinar which you can sit and watch, but we wanted it to actually have some outcomes as well. So yeah, I think I will just hand over to Tarek to introduce himself.
Yes, my name's Tarek, and I'm here on behalf of Form the Future, which, as Bob has already mentioned, is an organisation which has been working quite closely with CFCI over the last few years to develop the salience and the profile of the construction industry in Cambridgeshire schools. And we mostly focus on South Cambridgeshire and the Greater Cambridge and Cambridge City area. But we work with 80 plus schools, and we also go into other parts of the region as well, Norfolk and Hertfordshire and bits of Essex as well occasionally. So we have quite a lot of experience of working with young people, and we've done some brilliant work with CFCI on promoting things like Eco Hub Days in the past, trying to get ideas about construction into the thinking of young people, and more recently, as Bob has mentioned, helping to develop the Young Ambassadors network as well. So Form the Future is a social enterprise. We were set up in 2015. We do careers education with schools, as I mentioned. We do hundreds of events every year. Even during pandemic lockdown, we were doing lots of virtual activities and events as well. And those kind of range from things like STEM activities around a particular program that we do with leading companies called Cambridge Launchpad, all the way to doing employability skills like interviewing and CV writing and getting employers into the classroom. So we do games, careers carousels, careers fairs, anything you can think of, we do if it's related to careers. So my own background, I grew up in West Yorkshire. My dad was a factory worker in the textile industry, and by some kind of genetic freak, I ended up going to university and being the kind of first of my family to do that, and breaking into cultures that we were not used to, I had no experience of. So I went to Durham and then ended up working in London at the LSE, and then came to work in Cambridge for the university, for 2 colleges. So that was my own experience of trying to understand cultures where I didn't necessarily fit in, and there weren't very many people like me. And I was also reflecting on this earlier when the controversy about the experience of Azim Rafiq in Yorkshire County Cricket Club, a place where I grew up, and cricket being quite important in my family. I was reflecting on that experience, and it reminded me of the kind of everyday presence of racism when I was growing up, which almost becomes like background. But what you realize when you get older, that it's not something you can easily leave behind. It's not something that easily dissipates over time. Even though on the surface there might seem to be progress, incidents like what's happened at Yorkshire County Cricket Club shows us that changing culture and shifting attitudes and dealing with things that might be hardwired in people's brains is actually very hard work. And it's always commendable when an industry realizes that it needs to change that and starts making efforts to do it. And this is one of the reasons I'm pleased to be involved today. One of the other things that I did when I kind of started preparing for this was I had a look at the CFCI webpage, and this is by no means a criticism, it's just an illustration of the issue, and that is that all of the trustees are white, mostly men. All of the previous chairmen have been men since 1980, and all of the young ambassadors, which partly Form the Future is responsible for as well, are white as well. So that kind of gives us a baseline, I suppose, from which we can start to work and try and change ourselves as organizations, as well as trying to change the wider construction industry and wider society as well. I think we all have a responsibility to work with people, not just within our own areas, but in a wider context as well. I'll shut up there, otherwise I'll run out of things to say later.
Thank you, Tarek. No, that was really good. Amos, do you want to go next?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Amos Simbo. I've been in the industry now for nearly 10 years. So I run 2 businesses. So one of them is Black Professionals Construction, which we're here for today. And that really started it as, the energy behind that was to see how our industry, which, as all of you know, has got so much impact on our communities and it's largely ignored, I think, can be inclusive and should be inclusive. We're the center of everything when it comes to building homes, building communities, and the way we deliver our communities. But then we're quite far off in terms of being inclusive, and that was just one of the reasons. And also for myself, I've got a engineering background. And I came into construction without really knowing. So that was my first job that I got into construction when I finished university. And for me, that's one thing that just struck me to say, nobody had sort of, made me aware of all these fantastic opportunities that are in the industry. And outside looking in, people just think, and it's an industry that's one dimensional, but actually there is a lot that goes on within the industry. And it just rivals any other industry like tech, like finance, etc., but it's just not, I guess, well publicized. And for me, that, it's just something that stayed on my mind up until, setting up, BP Network. And before that, I'm an engineer, which worked for quite a number of big construction companies before I set up my own M&A company, which is Winning Services, and been doing brilliant. And that again was a challenge. When you want something, you set it up, and then you don't really know what sort of comes with it. So it's sort of every day is a new challenge. So it's been a challenge for the last 5-6 years. And the more you do stuff, the more it keeps getting challenging. So that's why I'm also on the other side. But again, just to reiterate, some of the stuff we're going to go into depth with in terms of how our industry really is at the center for a lot of things, and inclusion should be number one, on our agenda if we are to sort of change the sort of culture of the industry. Because by being inclusive, it just brings so many different elements to what's actually, it's a fantastic industry, but to what's actually goes on with the industry, to really look deep down into it, bringing those little facets. It's such a cultural industry will help dissipate some of the cultures that we need solving. So that's my intro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amos. Yeah, definitely like that bit you touched on about culture at the end there. Then I'll just hand over to you for both your introduction and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I think this is a fantastic event. It's a conversation that is so needed, and touching on the things that Tarek and Amos have already mentioned. So important that we're speaking to young people. So my name is Dana Walker. I'm the CEO and founder of something called Built by Us, which is also a social enterprise. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation. But what I wanted to speak to you about first was how I got here. So interesting, a couple of reflections on school. I too went to a school that did not talk about construction at all. It was an all-girls school. So we actually didn't get a design and technology set up until we merged with a boys' school. And that's the first time I encountered woodwork and metalwork and saw a lathe and all these sorts of things. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I'm getting to develop ideas and make things. I wonder if I could get more involved in this kind of area. I left school, the all-girls school, and went straight into being an apprentice electrician at the age of 16, which isn't sort of the typical route. We have a situation then and now where so much work has a kind of gender attached to it, or an expectation of who you might be in terms of your background, in terms of where you've come from. What we're really talking about is breaking that down, challenging that. It's important that we do. After working as an electrician for a couple of years, really working as an electrician was because I'd come from a background that didn't have a lot of money, and I'd heard people say, if you have a trade, you'll be okay, in the future. What I really loved was design, but everybody tried to put me off art and design. It's not for you. The best you can do is get a job in a bank if you are lucky. But I really wanted to be a furniture designer or an architect. So that's what I did. I was a bit like the Flashdance movie, but without the dancing. In the daytime, I was doing my electrical work, and in the evening taking art classes so that I could apply to do architecture, which I did. I qualified and I practiced as an architect for many years. Since then, the work that I do has really been informed by a kind of common thread that I've seen through my journey and the journey of many others in this amazing industry. It is an amazing industry. We are, creating magic here, but we could do so much better. And I believe we can do so much better if we're much more diverse and much more inclusive as a sector. And now I will go into my presentation. I have some slides to share for you, but I basically wanted to set out a little bit about what it is that I'm doing, about why it's important. And we're going to touch on today some of the things that you can do to help make an impact. So hopefully you can all see that. So I'm the CEO and founder of Built by Us. Hopefully most of you are familiar with the term social enterprise, but I would say that we're basically an organization that sits somewhere between notions of mission or purpose driven and being a kind of more standard business. And maybe some people position it as somewhere between being a charity and being a kind of standard business that you'd be all familiar with. And we have a mission. Our mission is to grow diversity and inclusion in the built environment. So very much inspired by the things that I experienced, by the research that I'd seen, by the experiences of so many people in our industry. I was inspired to create this organization, to look at the issue more holistically and to think about how we can work together, because actually making change is not something that a single individual hero is going to achieve. It's something that we all need to participate in. So our vision, a world built by all for all. One of the reasons that I see our industry, our sector as being almost magical is because everything that people are doing, whether you are learning, living, traveling, built environment has some sort of touch point on it. Someone has thought about that journey. Someone has thought about the design of a road, a pavement, a train, etc. We touch on the lives of the society, and I say it's a society that we serve. However, we don't reflect necessarily that society. And that's a challenge. That's a huge challenge in terms of how we think and what we focus on or prioritize when we are designing, when we are curating, when we are thinking about how we're going to fix problems. But that vision statement is really us setting out that we think that we're missing something in this industry. If we have more diverse voices around the table, we get a better built environment, because there are people bringing in fresh perspectives, asking important questions and helping us to solve problems and to innovate. So let's talk about diversity. It's one of those words that's thrown around so much, and often when I'm in sessions speaking to organizations, that's a big part of the work that we do, to work with forward-thinking organizations who are thinking about how they can make their businesses, their organizations, and even their outcomes more diverse or more inclusive. But often when I ask the question, people kind of look blankly and go, is it the mix? Is it something like that? Which is absolutely partly right. We're really talking about the way, particularly in the UK, social identities are recognised and contextualised. So social identities, those of you who are familiar with something called the Equality Act will know that there are 9 protected characteristics. But I'd say it goes further than that. So there are the things that make you who you are, you know, your intrinsic characteristics, and then there are extrinsic qualities. So that might be, you know, your education, that might be income, that might be whether you're a lone parent, etc., etc. So when I'm talking about diversity, I'm talking about all of the mix. So Built by Us as an organisation, we take an intersectional approach, i.e. we focus on gender, we focus on ethnicity, intergenerational working, disability, sexual orientations, and much more. So we don't take a kind of single agenda approach. And I would say it's incredibly important as an industry that we don't leave anybody behind when we're thinking about diversity. So when you think about all of these social identities, and we all have them, we all have ways that we identify in terms of our education, income, background, you know, there is always a mix, but some areas are more mixed than others. For me, thinking about diversity as a concept is really about accepting the world as it is. The world, our society, communities are incredibly diverse. Some sectors, including construction, have not been using the levers and are, more recently becoming more involved in thinking about how we can bring that diversity to our sector. So I guess one of the questions that we're answering today, what are the benefits? Why does this matter? So this diagram overall is representing what our consultancy area looks like. So I was very lucky to work on a project with the Construction Industry Council a few years ago, looking at the makeup of our industry. So at present, we're looking at, in terms of built environment practitioners, professionals, consultants, a gender mix of around 14%. So that's taking surveyors and project managers and architects and engineers, etc., etc. And I think this is a kind of interesting stat. We've certainly seen some improvement across the piece in terms of gender. And we've seen areas of improvement in other diversity strands as well. However, this change has been incredibly, incredibly slow. I think that we are missing out on an opportunity to get some of the most talented people into our industry, because the image of our industry is one where it seems to be more welcoming to men. It seems to have a particular perception, and that perception is set so early that it's actually quite difficult to undo. So I think Amos and Tariq were kind of hinting at that in their presentations. One of the things that I'm reminded of as I think about this stat, one of the projects that I worked on as an architect was the extension of a primary school. So I'm on site in my hard hat, and a group of teeny weeny kids come along, and the head teacher is with them. And the head teacher says, look, here's the person who's designing your school, the extension to your school. And these kids look at me like I just dropped from Mars or something. And then one of them said, oh, hello, Mr. Lady Builder. They were only around 7 years old, but they had already got this idea in their mind that a construction worker, a designer, an architect, they have a particular look. And it was confusing, to say the least, at first for many of these young people. But this is one of the reasons I think this work in terms of engaging young people, and the younger the better, is so important, because that gets so fixed so early. So the benefits of diversity, one of the things I often think about when I'm thinking about this question rather, is nature and ecosystems. There are reasons why diversity is kind of built into how we already live. When you're thinking about, having resilience, having strength, innovation, longevity, it's incredibly important that we have a mix of people. If we look at the demographics of the UK overall, we're an aging population. Those of you that are engaged in trying to get pupils or students into the construction sector will recognise that it's not that easy. We've got a lot of competition. There are tech organisations and other sectors that are doing a much better job of communicating what they do, but also challenging this notion that you have to come from a particular background to be able to do the work. And this is based on a history. Construction for the longest time has relied on quite a narrow bandwidth of talent. That has not only affected the diversity of the sector, but I think it's also impacted the experience of the men who work in the sector as well. So one of the things that I think can be improved incredibly, diversity, is the experience of all. I'm one of those nosy people. If I'm sitting in the back of a taxi, I'd always ask the question, ask them about themselves, how they got into the career that they're doing, that kind of thing. I'm amazed by how many men have left the industry because of a lack of flexibility, because it's quite difficult to balance all of that and to also have additional autonomy. And I think one of the reasons that we've seen this proliferate in our industry is because we've become much more used to managing processes and not people. So let's bring up a subject that can be quite a difficult one. You know, these conversations are challenging, absolutely. They're supposed to be. Sometimes people can feel quite uncomfortable talking about diversity. That's normal. But one of the challenges that I come across the most when I'm speaking to organizations is this notion of meritocracy, and this being a huge barrier in terms of making change in our industry. I don't think we have meritocracy in our industry, and particularly when we're looking at the professional sector as well. So the journeys that we take in order to go into higher education are impacted by so many steps on the way. Many of you will remember it was only perhaps last summer that it became apparent that at the A-level stage of the education system, there was an algorithm that was downgrading outcomes of exams for students. And of course, you all know that the outcome of those exams will impact the courses and where you can go, and if you even get to go to university. Those of you who read the story more deeply will have noted that many of the areas that were affected were areas where people are on lower incomes, for example. So what I often hear from organizations is that we're very meritocratic, you know, it's much more about what people can do. But if that journey has been impacted by bias, if that journey you know, sets out a situation where education is too expensive, for example, we're not really dealing with meritocracy, because actually at each stage, there are points where people cannot travel the pipeline to get into higher education, to get into professional areas. And there's been a huge amount of work looking at this issue of social mobility. So we mustn't forget income and class as part of this whole discussion. So another benefit in terms of diversity and inclusion for our sector, and I think this is particularly relevant as we're looking at a number of, you know, huge challenges that we face as a world. So the conversation has been so much about climate change, as it should be. But I don't believe that a discussion where people are more diverse thinking and perspectives are not around the table or part of the conversation is really going to help to solve these huge problems that we have in terms of inequality, in terms of huge differences in income, our infrastructure, our built environment, all of this, and our ability to build more efficiently, more affordably, cleaner energy. I believe that we need that diversity of voices, because people who are new to the industry, I would say, ask the most important question, which is why? Why are we doing what we're doing, how we're doing it? They challenge, they bring other ideas. This is what we need if we're going to face 21st century challenges that are being presented to us at present. So I think that diversity is the disruption that we need for our industry, to challenge the culture and the image of our industry, to create even better outcomes for our built environment, a more accessible and safer built environment. And I also think it's incredibly important in terms of thinking through and addressing the challenges going forward, whether that be climate change, etc. Without that disruption, we're going to find it incredibly challenging to improve our capacity, bring fresh talent into our industry. This is about future-proofing our industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. That was yeah, really good. One of the bits that stood out to me was when you said that as a construction industry that we serve the society, but that we don't reflect the society that that we're in. Yeah, I think that was quite powerful. And yeah, I think adapting to more reflect society will definitely help us to adapt to the change that you said. Yeah, I think now we're going to move into a sort of panel discussion. So if any of you have any questions for the panel, please put them either in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to pick them up. But yeah, I just want to kick things off kind of in relation to some of the Black Lives Matter things that were happening, not necessarily specifically to that, but a lot of companies put things out following that, whether it was comms or they said they were going to do various things as a result of that to try and make change happen. So I suppose the question is then, how can we avoid diversity washing and make sure that what these companies are doing actually have like tangible results and can actually make a difference? Amos, do you want to kick off? So you're on mute.
Sorry, yes, I was just moving in position. I guess the question was around, with what happened last year, are the companies making a tangible, difference? Is that the question? Yeah.
Yeah, and what we can do to make sure that the things or initiatives that our companies are taking up are actually making a difference, and not just like we're putting it out there for social media to make our company look good, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the first thing is sort of identifying it as something that is actually quite critical to be dealt with. As in, it's not a sideshow. It's not something that you're doing out of sympathy. It's not something that you have to kind of quickly pretend and then say let's move on. Actually, something I always give the comparison to how the sort of industry adopted to health and safety practices. That it became so pivotal to how our industry is, and that's essentially what inclusion is. It is that important. It should be really number one in terms of how the company sees itself and really where they want the company to be, the industry to be positioned, right? So there should not be any other reason apart from people. Of course, there is benefits for money. It makes the business more profitable, etc., etc. But the core reason for it should just be, to have an organization or company or industry that represents society that we live in. To have that alone should be the number one. And I think once an organization really, gets to a point to understand that and puts it as a priority, and it's not something that is just done. For example, in October, Black History Month, etc. So it's a continuous conversation, continuous engagement, and continuous monitoring. I guess that's why you keep the momentum, because you got to realize, we had Black Lives Matter last year, but the issue has been ongoing for such a long time. BLM was just a wake-up call because we had the pandemic, but everything that happened last year, we all saw it. But this has been ongoing for years. People have been, raising the issue, but no one has just been taking it seriously. And we don't want to go back into that space again, where that's the case, and then only highlighting things when they're critical. So that's what I would say in terms of continuing, having that continuity in terms of, because at some point we've got to be inclusive, right? Like, as in how long are we going to keep talking about this? Like forever, and I think people just need to realize that when they say we've got a long way to go, I think people forget to say how long is that way. It's almost like just left to nature to say someone else will sort it out. But really, it really should be looking at when is this going to end. So that's all I say in terms of keeping the continuation still.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Yeah, I think definitely needs to be the line drawn, and definitely the continuity side's important. I suppose Tarek, linking into what you do, I suppose, yeah, Form the Future, almost enabling companies in and around Cambridge to be able to do these things, at least with younger people, and to interact more with those that might not have the opportunities. A bit like what Dana mentioned in terms of the extrinsic qualities, maybe their upbringing, that sort of thing. So how would you see that linking in to make sure that companies can see a tangible difference from the sort of initiatives they take up and the things that they're doing, maybe in conjunction with Form the Future?
Yeah, I think that there's a kind of complex set of issues there, and also kind of monitoring the questions as well. There are a couple of interesting things coming up as well. So on the one hand, I think there is I mean, I don't want to be cynical about companies, but companies are motivated by things that are not necessarily social outcomes. So a lot of them motivated by shareholder value or making a profit. And then, of course, there are then things like ESG or CSR or some other set of acronyms that crop up occasionally, which get them to focus to some extent on social and environmental issues that they need to present to their consumers as being taken seriously. Now, some of them do take them seriously. Some do it for PR and promotional purposes. And there's a whole issue around what the purpose and value, what is it that companies should focus on? Is it shareholder value or stakeholder value? And I think the emphasis shifts depending on where the company boards and shareholders or the owners put that emphasis. So I think that's one issue. One of the things I just wanted to touch on, which is related to how companies can do more in this area. Dana touched on, her experience of the young kids coming up to her and referring to her as Mr. Lady Builder. And the research shows that this is research done by academics for education employers, that from the age of 6, children start to grasp the concept of a set of behaviors belonging to each sex, and therefore begin seeing jobs and future pathways as intrinsically gendered. That's from the age of 6, that's primary school. And then from the age of 9, they're beginning to see their social value based on perceptions of social class and intelligence. By this age, children abandon fantasy careers, i.e. being astronauts, associated with the very young, and start to become more aware of potential constraints on their futures. Okay, so this just proves how important it is to get in early and start to address those stereotypes from an early age. And we at Form the Future, to address one of the questions about the kinds of events that we run in schools, we've been doing things like project days with companies like TWI, with Hill, with McDonald, specifically around getting younger kids to do things like build things or weld with chocolate. That wouldn't work with me, I'd just eat it. But anyway, those are kind of things that we've been doing with schools to try and break that down. However, we still need to go earlier than that. We still need to go into schools and do more. And I think this is an area where companies can start to change things for the long term as well. So as well as recruiting more widely and more inclusively, think about what volunteer activities they're doing in schools with organizations like Form the Future, but not exclusively us. There are others as well. But we're the best. But anyway, the issue there is a big societal one, and one of the things I do in my spare time is I run a group called the Cambridge Commons, which is all about socio-economic inequality, which is where the intersectionalism comes in around how poverty intersects with class and race and gender and all of these other things. I think it helps for companies to have an awareness of that, not to narrow their focus down onto particular things, whether that's university recruitment or apprenticeships and so on, but to understand the background that is relevant. So when I talk to young kids in schools, some of the kids that come to me are kids that are not going to do well at GCSE, and they're going to get the minimum grades, if that at all. And their default position is to go into a trade like their dad or their uncle or their stepdad, whoever it happens to be. And that has always bothered me, because it's not something that is, maybe it's wrong to say it's not aspirational, but in the sense that it's not aspirational for them, that they've narrowed their options. They only see one thing that they can possibly do, and they see as construction falling into that area. Now, obviously, construction doesn't want to be seen as that kind of industry. It needs to be an aspirational industry. So one of the ways that the industry can address that is by presenting itself not just as a trade, but as a profession or a set of professions. If you start on site as a brickie or a carpenter, where can that lead you? What skills are you acquiring as a consequence of doing that? How are they transferable? you know, what could you be doing in 10 years' time? How could you earn more and improve your socio-economic status as a consequence of doing that? What is the value of continuous learning and doing qualifications and so on, rather than just turning up one day and kind of, you know, doing the manual labor? So I think there's a whole issue around that, about how you present the whole industry as a profession. And there are loads of other things, but I think if I try to answer them all now, I probably monopolize the discussion, so I don't want to do that. So I'll come back to some of them later.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Thank you. Yeah, definitely a bit shocked by the age of 6. That's quite crazy. That. Laura, do you want to bring something up from the chat?
One of the questions that links into that that's come through on the chat is to do with how you get into the industry and the barriers that are putting that off. And I wonder, Dana, if you could talk slightly in terms of the first question there, in terms of career changes. Like Tarek was just mentioning, going into one part of the industry and then how that could branch into others, and what are the barriers to that at the moment?
That's a great question. And it's a kind of mixed answer, because I think some professions have really been thinking about this, how they can attract people with other skills into their sector. So I think we definitely see this around things like planning, where there are already kind of pathways where you maybe meet some criteria, you bring other skills, but that's all recognized. I think this is something that we have a bit of an issue with in our industry. So no surprise that being an electrician had nothing in terms of something I could carry over. It was something that people, oh, that's really interesting, but you'll just have to start, you know, from the beginning. So I think for lots of people, it can be quite daunting, because, you know, what they're being told is, okay, you've got a certain amount of skill, a certain amount of work experience, but you're basically going to have to kind of start again. Very little of it is transferable. The areas where I think this is lessened is things like project management, for example. I meet project managers all the time, come from right across the spectrum in terms of sectors. So what I'd like the industry to think about, and I think there are a couple of things here, the fact that it's quite siloed. Of course, we need specialisms, but, you know, where are those points, particularly quite early in careers, where people can more easily step across and explore other things? Many of the people that come onto our mentoring programs, so we run career mentoring programs, are trying to untangle this issue. So they've already committed perhaps to architecture or to engineering, but how do I then get to do something else? And it isn't as easy as it should be, considering that often people come with so much amazing experience. So better, clearer pathways, but also raising that conversation. This is something that we want. We're not giving that message when we're saying, oh, I know that you've gone and studied this, that, and the other over here, or even have built environment qualifications from somewhere else. But now that you're here, you'll have to start again.
Another really interesting discussion point that keeps appearing in the questions here is to do with unconscious bias. So what are the tools that companies or professionals, we can do as individuals, do to sort of learn and approach the fact that everybody has it? And what are the ways that we can then address that, in particular to construction?
That's a great question. I'm happy to start. So I think it's about both unconscious and conscious bias. So the moment from which unconsciously you are making decisions to taking action, that's the moment where it becomes tangible. So I think, you know, also reflecting on the earlier question about diversity washing, what people often want to do is to jump to taking action and making change without necessarily addressing some of these more tricky issues. So organizations, I think, should engage and be involved with unconscious bias training, which helps you to understand on an organization, but also on an individual level, where those biases might be and how they are affecting your decision making. And in terms of tools and techniques, so there are a number of things that people can engage in. So there are tests that you can do. There is guidance on this, each step in terms of challenging those biases, everybody has them. It's almost impossible in this society not to have them, because the messaging around different social identities can become quite fixed or stereotypical. And then I think where possible, changing the way that you make decisions in terms of processes. So I've come across the odd company where it's quite a large company, but one person is making all the decisions about recruitment, which I think is intriguing. So they might be 60, they might be 60 plus, but one person makes those decisions. So, looking at things like having a large group, actually having a diverse panel, those sorts of things, as an example of how bias can creep into the system, but also how you can start to challenge it, question, and be accountable for it as well.
Tarek, did you have your hand up in response to that one as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think unconscious bias is a difficult one because it's unconscious. So I think the first step is to realize you have unconscious bias. And then I've been reading a bit of neuropsychology, as part of developing my career coaching technique about how that plays a role. There are a number of different things that we do with kids that can try and overcome that. So we try and do things that kind of tap into different parts of their brain. So it's not just the neocortex, the rational decision-making part, but also the more emotional aspects, and using imagery and visual activities and games and things like that help them to kind of address some of the bias that they themselves might have, and as opposed to unconscious bias that employers might have. So there are techniques, and there's kind of emerging work on this in the in psychology and behavioral science and so on, that a lot of recruiters and so on are now building into their processes. So it's worth looking at that and seeing how it can be added in. I mean, I think that another thing that I think is important is that if you're trying to address specific groups, there are certain things that you can do that might reach specific groups, whether that be racial minorities or whether that might be women and so on. But one of the things I've always thought is important is to understand the importance of difference, full stop, because you can get into the trap of thinking of groups and of minorities as being homogenous when they're not. There's a huge degree of variety within groups. So within Muslim communities, for example, there's many different layers of practice and non-practice, for example. So some things that you might want to do, which you think might appeal to certain groups, may not work, So I think the important thing there is to try and treat people as individuals, first of all, and understand what makes them individuals. And then to create environments that celebrate difference, so where no one is left out because of whatever their difference might be. And I think often it's natural for workplace cultures to develop that tend towards the majority culture. And then there are kind of unspoken heuristics that come into play, ways of doing things. So I began to understand this when I first went to university. So moving from my own community where certain cultural and social practices were the norm, going to a university where a completely different set of cultural practices were the norm amongst my peer group, so for example, going out and drinking, all of these things that I immediately then was excluded from because I couldn't kind of relate to that because I had no experience of it in my own background. So to give you an example, I mean, I turned up to university with a suit and a briefcase, right? Because that's what I thought university was. I had no kind of reference point to tell me any different. And immediately that sets you apart because not only do you look different, but you're wearing something that isn't the norm and you're not engaging in the same social practices as well as other groups. And obviously you can kind of get over that once you realize you're making a complete dork of yourself, you will try and change, right? But it shouldn't have to be like that. There should be much more effort on the part of organizations to understand that people are individuals and come from a unique set of perspectives and to try and deal with that. And one of the things I quite liked and one of the things I read was about the idea of mentorship and buddying. So when you go into an organization, you're somebody that's assigned to you as your friend or mentor that can help you to kind of navigate some of those issues around that and becoming part of the culture. And I think, I always think it's inevitable there's going to be a workplace culture. Okay, and part of what attracts people to work in certain companies is the workplace culture and the kinds of people that you're working with. But how do you ensure that that culture isn't negative? It's a positive one. That's, I think, maybe a good way to start thinking about it for companies. There was somebody that asked a question about parents and the influence of parents. That's absolutely true. Parents have a huge influence. And Form the Future is organizing parents' workshops where we talk to them about how to talk to their kids about careers, and not to try and force them to be doctors and pharmacists and accountants when they don't want to be. And one of the ways that we deal with kids in careers guidance sessions is that we're not there as careers advisors to tell them what to do, or to say, well, look, there's a skill shortage in this area, go and work there. The point is to understand who they are and what motivates them, what their interests and passions are, and get them to construct their own kind of narrative and their own pathway rather than imposing it on them. And that comes into conflict a little bit with what the needs of the local economy are. There is a big mismatch between the aspirations of young people and the jobs that are available. They're two very different things, and there's research that shows that. So that's an underlying structural problem that we have, as well as the actual skills that you need to do those jobs, which are also lacking. So I'm not making it easy. I know I'm making it more difficult, but I think all of these things are worth bearing in mind.
Yeah, that's very good. I quite like the point about celebrating our individual differences, and yeah, I think another one of the things you touched on, probably mentoring, probably links in with that quite well, because a lot of that is one-to-one and not necessarily just aimed at a certain group or that sort of thing. I suppose along those lines, Amos, would you have anything to say on celebrating people's individual differences and mentoring, and how we can develop that as companies?
Yeah, I think you can easily get lost in, like, is in trying to find, we spoke about unconscious bias and all that sort of stuff, but really, like what Dan was saying, a lot of it is actually conscious. People, it doesn't mean if you provide someone information they're going to necessarily change. They might just, they might just take, so there's studies around, small thing, obviously, like the messaging has stopped quite a number for smoking, but others still do. The messaging around it, quite a number of things. So it's like a lot of it is obviously conscious, but then it's looking at, we're dealing with people's lives here, so it's not a case of it's not even an option. It's got to be, we have to be inclusive and change. So if you look at demographics like London, where there's a ethnic minorities are like 42-43%, right? And then you look in the workplace environment in London, the numbers are like 2-5%. That's almost just people that just been left out. It's been segregated for no reason whatsoever, apart from the fact that they just been. So it really should be taken much more seriously, because as much as people have been unconscious bias training and all that, things haven't really moved forward. So it's organizations really have to take much more stronger steps to kind of step in and cover that gap. And also, as much as obviously over the years, there's a pipeline that comes from schools and kids and all that sort of stuff. But that's been happening for quite a while, and then when you live within companies and senior level, et cetera, the numbers are not changing, right? So it's like, in some instances, going to schools can actually be used as an excuse to say, we're in the diversity, when are we going to school next? Look, deal with the adults that you have, like in your company. Like where are they going? Why are they not getting up the ladder? Why are they, all that sort of stuff. So it's almost like the equation is quite simple. So let's not really complicate it, right? What happens is if your organization is not inclusive, let's not look for any other reason. Just it's pure and simple, because we're an organization that come to us and say, look, we're struggling with. Basically, what was happening was their hiring process. There was a massive drop-off when it comes to ethnic minorities. So loads of people would apply, but then when it comes to interviews, it will just drop off, right? And then they automated the whole system up until interview stage. So you just put in your name. So you wouldn't put your name, sorry, you just put your experience, etc. It took all the names out. But again, as soon as it comes to interview, it dropped off. So they look, you're the problem. Like, you're trying to find the problem everywhere else. but it's actually just you, and you've done all your unconscious bias training, you've done all these things. So really, you know, I hate to put it, but even, you know, in terms of how these things are monitored, you know, the figures and numbers behind it, it's a simple equation. You know, F minorities are not really included. And it's time we just, you know, we really cut through a lot of the stuff. Is, for example, what's happening with the environment. We can go round and round in circles until cities start flooding, really, because all we're doing is we're sort of kidding ourselves, thinking we're making progress when we're not. So, you know, when it comes to the workplace, I think the best thing is to keep the solution really, really simple. You know, if you haven't got enough, you know, F minorities organizations, get more of them, right? But obviously, at a younger age, get the pipeline, do the skill engagement, but then also how you retain, you know, looking at your culture really intrinsically, right? And actually maybe measure it to say this is where we are. You know, people disclosing, you know, ethnicity pay gap and all that sort of stuff. Get to real figures. That's something that you can measure, at least you can improve. And it's as simple as that, and then, you know, cut out all the essential excuses. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's really interesting, and it also links and touches on the point of retention as well as getting people in the door, because actually there's a huge drop-off rate, and, you know, across the construction to do with the inflexibility in the workplace, across every sort of part of the sector, really. And I think that links to one of the questions we've got in the chat here in terms of day to day, how can we keep people in industry if they've come into it and retain them? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of thoughts on this. So yes, retention and progression, I think, are really important issues. What we have seen, there have been moments, I think, in time where the industry has said, you know what, we need to be more diverse. So we see companies, you know, kind of flying a particular flag and saying, we're going to do this. People experience something that's quite different from the kind of marketing and PR that has been done. So they're going into organizations where perhaps they don't feel celebrated, where there's an expectation that they will have to change completely to be part of the industry, and that the things that they need in order to thrive and contribute to their organizations, because that's what we want to do. You know, there are barriers to that. So things like flexibility, it's amazing as an industry, you know, we're quite conservative as an industry. We don't necessarily embrace the latest technology straight away. It takes us a while. But in the 21st century, you know, when you're looking at, for example, job postings, many of them, the majority of them don't even mention flexibility. The pandemic has probably been the thing that is changing that conversation, because now we're talking about hybrid working, working from home and all this kind of, but before it was like, oh my goodness, no, everyone's going to be at home, you know, in their slippers, not doing any work. We don't want that. You know, we expect you to be present. We expect you to do long hours. So I think, you know, we've really got to think about in terms of retention, and also in terms of the competition for skills. You know, what is it that people are saying they want? They want flexibility, they want autonomy, but also, pardon me, they want to be recognized and to be able to progress and not be held back. You know, when we're looking at the demographics in leadership, as an industry, we're not seeing diverse leadership in this industry. So people are looking up to the next level and thinking, well, very unlikely I'm going to get there, because almost everybody here is called James. You know, they're male, they work all the time. Do you know what I mean? If we're not setting that at the highest level, how are we expecting people from more diverse backgrounds to see this industry as not only somewhere that they can be, but they can contribute and they can thrive? So we need those sorts of changes as well. Otherwise, we just get this revolving door. We bring new talent, young people, and they leave. They can go elsewhere. There are certain sectors that love our graduates, etc. You know, and they will, you know, make sure that they're using these attractors to bring them across into their industries.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, I like one of the things that you mentioned in terms of like people looking up to leaders as maybe an inspiration for their future careers or something like that, and maybe seeing one type of person up there, or yeah, people from similar backgrounds or that sort of thing. And yeah, I suppose maybe linking into that industry recognition. Maybe Amos, have you got anything to add on maybe how recognition for those within industry, maybe even not at the top, but maybe at various levels, can then help this to make people see good role models going forward?
Yeah, I think the one thing is people just gotta be brave enough to give people a chance. You know, I don't know if anyone on the call, obviously, I'm a football fan, and you know, I don't particularly support anyone by watching that football. But you know, look at as an example, the team like Manchester United, they gave someone with no experience, never done it before, a solid chance. That's what you call giving someone a chance. Just trying someone out who knows, you know, that guy's never managed like a team like that ever in his life. So that's what I'm saying, you know, when it comes to information, give people a chance. Like right now, myself, for example, with Winway, we're doing about 1.2, 1.3 million turnover, right? But when I was in actual work, I never used to be taken to interviews. I can't put it down to anything, but I was just as good as anybody else. It just used to baffle me to say, when it comes to tender interviews, I just wouldn't go. I just didn't put the cut. Up until now, I don't want to put in one thing, but you know, sometimes it's just about giving people that chance. Just give someone a chance. What else could they do and fail, right? Because sometimes we treat ourselves like, you know, we're going to space or driving a rocket when we're not. You know, if someone is a commercial manager, that's what it is. What else could they do wrong? You know what I mean? So as an industry, it's almost like it's right in your face, like, and it's also like a cultural thing. So when you're talking about retention, I think, you know, we did mention retention. Laura mentioned retention, right? Right. Company said, yeah, we want to retain people, but you got to retain people in a certain culture, in a certain environment, right? Like, I'm just giving an example. Quite a number of the sites, significant amount of sites in the industry still don't have female toilets, right? Like, there's no way you're going to retain someone like that. They're not going to come back to that building site, or they're not going to feel comfortable. People, for example, with the mental health issues don't get paid on time, right? They just wouldn't love the industry. If you're a business, our industry, such a people industry, you have to know people. If you don't know anyone, you're not going to win any business. That's just how it is. And you've got to be in a certain circle. I ended up drinking beer, which I don't even like, because I had to fit in, right? You know, to certain people. And then I realized I was allergic to it. And that's how I realized I was actually allergic to beer, right? Because I just was like, you can't go there. That's why it's happening, right? And thing is, it's a cultural thing, because number one, if you don't go in those spaces, your relation with everyone just distances gradually until you and the people you're supposed to relate to cannot even bother with each other, right? So, you know, you don't go out. The next day, you don't even know what they're talking about, and then it just grows and grows. You don't get invited again. You don't want to go either, right? And then before you know it, you just treat that workplace like it's just a job, like that you're not part of the family, and then the retention drops. But then everyone is screaming, yes, we're being inclusive. But then just look at the industry itself. There's just so many facets, right? If you think about the toilet thing, right, it just blows your mind how the whole industry still struggles with that. Like, if that's what we're struggling with, it literally tells us exactly where we are, you know, as an industry. You get clients that give you a program to complete in half the time. And you're like, how is that even good for anyone's mental health? Do you know what I mean? And then just do it, or like your budget is too much. So it's like all these things, right? I feel like sometimes we get lost talking about, it's easy to get lost talking about fairy tales, about diagnosing and all these other bigger equations about, you know, disease and consciousness. You know, you can get lost in it, you know, with all the big psychological words. When the simple thing is, it's literally right in front of you. It's your culture. It's what you're organizing. It's things that you tolerate. It's things that I was talking with one company last week. I was like, you know, we talk about toolbox talks, yeah, that we do on. So these are practical things, right? Why not implement all these things into that? Like, all we ever talk about when it comes to toolbox talks about slips and trips and all that sort of stuff, right? And what kind of stuff, you know, like all this stuff that no one listens to anyway, right? In some instances, like as a client, when was the last time? So these are practical things that if you're someone in a position of influence, which is usually the client or the project managers, to practically implement this thing. The rest of it, we can talk and talk and talk, right? You just want to, when it comes to promoting people, right? There's a guy right in front of you, just promote him. just do it. I don't see what's so difficult about it. But then I feel like sometimes the conversation gets lost into a lot of kind of like fairy tale big words, but then you're dealing with people's lives there, right? It's just people that are just getting fed up and fed up and fed up over time, and then they're leaving, and it's just an ongoing, because it's obviously affecting a certain minority, a certain number of people. The people that the system is benefiting, I guess, like with infrastructure, the voices are not as loud, I guess. Right. So for you, okay, it doesn't affect me. Okay, fine, it's not my problem. Or I can only go as far as this. But really, it's got to be a collective effort. Where our industry, we talk about attracting, but the problem is actually the industry itself. If you really think about it, the industry is the problem. It's not the people. People will come if you create a good environment. So I can see Laura wants to go.
Well, I just wanted to add to your point. I think that, like you say, we're talking about the kind of philosophy of it, but actually these really practical steps we can take. I've lost count of how many building sites I've turned up that do not have toilets for me to use, or PPE that is in a size footwear less than an 8, or high vis that's basically a dress on you, and you end up you get belittled by feeling like a child because you're suddenly dressed in all these men's size clothing walking around, and it isn't safe either. You're sort of trying not to fall over because your shoes are 3 sizes too big. And actually bringing it back to those sort of really key practical steps of making people feel welcome and included by making sure you've catered for them and thought about them ahead of time on the kind of practical level, as well as sort of the making sure they were invited into the room in the first place. That was just a thought to add in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it also relates, obviously, it's a different topic. Like, last week we talked about COP26 and the environment. And then they're like, for a normal builder, how did they become carbon zero? And it was like, oh, we haven't figured that out. Like, that's what you need to figure out first, because the rest of it is just talk, right? Like, to a normal builder who's a painter or a plumber, you say, do you want him to walk to work? Do you want him to I don't know, what do you want me to do? Do you know what I mean? And then, so all these things sometimes can be too intellectual, really, for our own good, where when you actually come to practical steps to say, how do I become carbon neutral then? What do you want me to do tomorrow? I'll do it. We'll be like, all right, nothing. It's all on paper and just in the air. So it's things like inclusion, right? You've got to think on a day-to-day basis, the guy that sits in front of you, that's at your work, how are they feeling about it? What are you going to do about it? In that sort of way, because to be honest with you, everyone in this whole world, unless you're like a 2-year-old kid, knows about inclusion. Like, it's been hammered into us, especially last year, right? Everyone knows the history now. Everyone knows what happened. Everyone knows all the tragedies. It's like, just knowing about it without the action really, it just means in about 15 years time, we're going to have another BLM and we can all get angry about it again, instead of, can we just sort it out,
I'm just aware of time, so I'm going to ask one more questions from the chat, which is one from Bob, actually, to do with your guys' view on positive discrimination in terms of recruitment and retention across all the different definitions we've got for diversity. I don't know if Tarek, you want to start with some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a place for positive discrimination, definitely, when it's about redressing previous imbalances and injustices. So, for example, if, for example, somebody is applying for a job, and they may not necessarily have the experience or the qualifications to do that job, but there could be a whole set of reasons for that. There could be a whole set of barriers that they've faced and they've had to overcome just to get to where they are. And then it kind of introduces a ceiling. They can't go any further than that, because if they apply for a job where the certain minimum criteria is this level of qualification or experience, they may have the ability, but they can't access that job. And I think that's important. So it's important at some point for people to realize that people come from different starting points. Some people get a head start in life because of all the disadvantages. It's not meritocratic at all. And as Dana was saying right at the very beginning, meritocracy is a bit of a myth. It is a myth. It doesn't really work in practice, because anyone who succeeds depends on other people to succeed in other circumstances. They very rarely do it on their own. So that's one point. So if you're recruiting, kind of try and do away with asking for experience and qualifications. Look at the ability of the person and their potential, and then recruit on that basis. And I think if you do that, you're more likely to retain them, because you've shown trust in them and their ability, and you're going to invest in developing them and getting them the skills and experience that they need, that they haven't had the opportunity to access. I've forgotten what your question was. Was that the question?
Yes. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. And Dana, any final thoughts on that particular topic?
I think this is such an interesting question, and I note in And the way that you've framed it, Bob, you know, many companies seem to think this is a step too far to engage with this kind of work. But actually, I would say as an industry, you're already doing it, but you're doing it to benefit your in-group, not to benefit anybody else. Okay, so let's just be clear about that. Second thing, just in terms of the phrasing, so under the Equality Act, positive action is really what we're talking about. So there is a kind of legal framework upon which you can do this. Any sector, you know, whether it's education or anything else, if they recognize that there are gaps, if they recognize that there is underrepresentation, they can do more legally to attract and support whoever is underrepresented. I don't believe that positive discrimination has ever actually, I'm not a lawyer, but ever existed in law. It's interesting to me that it's one of those phrases that, and that's one of the first things people often say, you're absolutely right. Companies go, oh, we're talking about positive discrimination. We're talking about bringing people in who are less than. I feel deeply uncomfortable with that notion, because again, it's people trying to inoculate themselves from the truth. So when you're looking at, you know, the numbers of people going through on built environment courses, whether that's architecture or surveying, etc., we're also talking about graduates with good qualifications not getting jobs. You know, this idea that it's, you know, people who have just kind of wandered in off the street, you're going to have to give jobs to them. No, it's actually addressing the biases. Yes, recruiting on potential, recognizing lived experience and other types of factors in terms of skill sets as well. I think this is all part of it. And also taking on inclusive recruitment. How can you de-bias your process? I remember hearing from an organization where they were saying, oh, we can't really understand why we don't get a lot of people from, you know, around the world applying. You know, we only tend to get one type of person, maybe an Anglo name, etc., etc. But it turns out that there was someone in that chain who would delete the CVs if their name sounded foreign. That's, you know, this is the kind of thing we're talking about. So the people who are doing the hiring never got to see the CVs because the administrators were already making that decision. So, you know, that's a, you know, an obvious example of how bias, you know, one of the ways that bias can affect processes. So, you know, until we are looking at that alongside the positive actions that we can take, that's how we're going to make change.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, kind of on the momentum of positive actions and looking to make changes, feel free to send in any diversity initiatives that your company is currently doing. So yeah, feel free to pop that on the chat, and we will also be looking to put them up on the CFCI website as well. So whether you send them through now or even if you email them across to the CFCI later on, we will look to make a page on the CFCI website for the initiatives that companies are doing, and then also ideas for initiatives that you can take up. Because yeah, ultimately we do want there to be positive steps taken, and don't just want it to kind of be like a status quo as it is now. Ultimately, the whole point in this was to start a discussion on change, but now is when the action has got to take place. So yeah, I think we've got something on the CFCI that we're looking to commit to in terms of this. Laura, do you want to share your screen? Yeah, so I suppose this is just a bit of an example on how we might react to change. Yeah, a lot of the time everyone's all up for it, but in the end no one's up for changing. So yeah, initiatives. So within the CFCI, the CFCI has done quite a few things already to try and improve diversity in the people that are involved in CFCI events. and this is something that, yeah, the CFCI wants to really improve. So as part of this, they're going to carry out a kind of annual audit to assess this and to try and ensure that it is something that they're improving on, and it's not just leaving it as a status quo. That people can see diversity in these events and in what's happening within the Cambridge construction industry. So outside of the CFCI and in all of our companies, I've got a few ideas here, and then I'll maybe open it out to the other panelists, or if you put any on the chat, we can read them out. But I've got a couple here to start off with. In relation to training, a couple of ones would be diversity and unconscious bias training. Another is in terms of leadership, management and leadership training for people at various levels, not just at necessarily management levels, but maybe people at graduate level getting that. That can also help to understand people and the sort of individual needs of people, and a bit like what Tarek was saying earlier on, not just maybe treating people as a group or whatever, but treating people as individuals. So yeah, that's quite an important one. And blind recruitment, I think that's a few things have been mentioned that not great recruitment practices going on. So blind recruitment can be one of the ways to solve that. And yeah, I think some of the aspects of interacting with schools and within the Cambridgeshire construction industry, definitely interacting with Form the Future, and yeah, linking up, whether that's doing events with schools or even elements like work experience. Form the Future can help to provide a link between companies and students for that. I don't know, Tarek, if you want to just touch on that.
Yeah, I mean, most schools are looking to do some form of work experience, and we act as the kind of facilitator or go-between between linking schools up, with companies and students, and carrying out the health and safety checks that are needed to do that, to make it easier. So anybody that wants to pledge work experience, there's a huge shortage of work experience opportunities, particularly over the last couple of years because of COVID. And some schools are not doing it because they have other priorities at the moment, which are to do with curriculum. But, from next academic year, hopefully, as things get back to normal, it should be more possible to do properly organized and structured work experience. And if anyone wants to get in touch with us at Form the Future, we can help with that.
Right. Laura, was there anything on the chat that came in?
It linked exactly to that from Alice, which was conscious that people who put themselves forward for work experience are often self-selected. So how can we find students from a wider range of backgrounds in order to offer this experience to them in our practices?
I think, again, I work with schools on, we're generally working with schools and children who are on the more vulnerable, disadvantaged end of the spectrum at the moment. And that's our program. I've got a 3-4 year program to do that. So I'm working with a school that has a very high level of free school meals, for example, at the moment, and pupil premium kids. And it is possible to identify who those kids are, and then to kind of encourage them into those opportunities or build it into their program of work at school as well. That's also possible. I also work with a school which is for excluded kids, the kids who've been excluded from the mainstream, and they've had a very good program with a construction company recently, and their team won the kind of regional competition that they entered for that reason. So again, we can get to those kids that are at the very sharp end of the social disadvantage as well. So there are ways of identifying young people that would benefit the most.
Very good. Amos, do you have anything to add in terms of initiatives? I know before you were saying in terms of more practical steps that we can take.
Yeah, no, for us, from next year, we're going to continue our BPIC 100, which is grad, interns, and apprenticeships. And we're trying to get them really structured in a nice way. So things like internships, people, sometimes treat you like just walking around with someone for 2 weeks, but actually you can be structured in a really nice way to get some experience. I'm only in construction because of the 2-week internship. That's what happened to me during my uni days. So that's what we're up to. We're also doing a cross-industry mentoring scheme as well, which is essentially looking at, not just mentoring, but also like how can you get what they called sponsors, people that will help you get into the right spaces that you might not have been accustomed to, and you couldn't have got access if you didn't know anybody, right? Because some of these networks are so close-lipped that you don't even know they exist if you don't know, right? So it's looking at those people and just kind of like better ways of practical ways of embedding people into the industry, right? Because the rest of some of the actions are kind of, like I said, on the surface, but these are looking at, okay, this person wants to get there, how can we, so yeah, that sort of stuff, we're going to be commencing, and I think working with the industry, working with industry partners, I know people are asked to find a lot of mentoring, those things and initiatives do actually help things to happen on a more practical level, and actually just create the change. I know I keep banging on about it, but I think it's more about the action, really. To say, let's do it in a collaborative manner and let's do it tomorrow. For now.
Yeah, good stuff. Dana, do you have anything to add in terms of initiatives?
Yeah, and just kind of building on Amos's point about things needing to be practical and realistic. So there are a number of things that we're engaged with. So support and advice. So whether you are at the very beginning of your sort of career journey, so we have sessions that people can sign up to, typically for free, as part of our kind of build program, so you can get advice on how to get into the industry, but also once you're there, some of the how to navigate the industry as well. So actually one of our next sessions next week, we're going to be talking about negotiation. We also do I suppose more traditional kind of mentoring, where it's a variety of backgrounds. For 12 months you work with another individual, someone who's in the industry, again, who you can work with, who's really kind of meeting you where you are in terms of your development and what progress in your career looks like for you. And I'm very excited, very soon we'll be opening up applications for something called SHAPE. So that's our program for those practitioners who have an idea or want to start their own businesses within the built environment. So we're gonna, I think it'll be the 3rd year of the program. So we're very excited to be opening that up again. So no matter where you are in your journey, we have something for you, but also for all those people who are listening to this thinking, okay, what can I do? I'd really like to make a call to those allies and supporters. Join us. You can be a mentor or volunteer, whether you have an hour, whether you have a couple of hours a month for 12 months or 6 months. There is something here that you can be part of in terms of driving that change. We'd love to hear from you.
Very good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we all have to be a part of that change, really. And yeah, by getting involved and linking up with these sort of organizations and even doing things within our own organization, I think it's really important. But yeah, I think that's us pretty much out of time. So I just want to say, yeah, thank you to Tariq, Dana, and Amos. And yeah, I'll just hand over to Simon to wrap things up.
Thank you, Stephen. Wow. So I don't think we've had a CFCI event so far with so many questions raised, and I'm heartened by that. I must admit I was initially disheartened by actually some of the stats and things I heard about us as an organisation, and it's made me think a little bit more about what perhaps I personally should be doing. But thank you very much to everybody, to Stephen and Laura from the CFCI Young Ambassadors today for organising the event, and for Tarek, Dana, and Amos for speaking today and giving up your time, both in preparation of what you've talked about today, but also taking the time out to speak to our members. It reminded me actually of I suppose in our industry, if you do a search, there's something like 181 apparently different careers in construction. And I can imagine as a young person, it's quite confusing nowadays to actually find out about what you can do in construction, whether it's an architect or whether it's somebody who's outside more on site. You know, I think part of our roles, everybody's role in construction is to perhaps offer themselves to give a real life, what's the word, version of what the opportunities are in construction, because it's so exciting. You know, with climate emergency and the things we're going to have to change, and not just in what we build, but how we're going to do that, because we know the construction industry hasn't got enough people to make those changes. So we're going to have to reach out to more people. So there's some really exciting opportunities, and I thank all of our speakers today for actually saying some quite harsh truths, actually, because I think as an industry, we don't always do that. Yeah. So thank you very much, everyone. Just a few more notes. I'm sorry to keep you. I've only got 2 more minutes just to say what other talks we've got coming up. We've got 2 webinars planned, although not yet fully booked into the calendar, coming up soon, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So watch the website and your emails for that. And one other thing to say, we've got the Cambridge Design and Construction Awards have just been released. For entries. I think the deadline is something like the 7th of January. And this year we have the normal projects, portfolios that we want to be submitted, but we also have the People's Awards. So we have Young Professional, Apprentice and Site Manager Awards, and we've also introduced a Contractor Award this year as well. So have a look, type into Google or whatever search engine you use, Cambridge Design and Construction Awards. As I say, 7th of January is the submission date. So if you can look at that, but I think that's it for today. So once again, thank you very much to all of our speakers. You know, the CFCI wouldn't exist unless you guys just put your time to these things. So really good of you to do so. Dana, Tarek and Amos, thank you very much. And to Stephen and Laura as well for organizing. Okay. Goodbye, everybody, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.